And especially in a country like India, where urbanization is still relatively low. As Montec say, we are facing an enormous scale of urbanization in the last 20 years. So a lot of people are going to move to the cities. I see a large city like a bit a factory where you have very poor people, maybe some of them illiterate, who arrive on one side. And after a number of years, those people in cities are going to become middle class, and some of them have become middle class. The success of the city, or the management of the city, is to know how long it will take for a family who arrive from the countryside with skills. They have skills, but those skills are practically irrelevant in the city. How long will it take for this illiterate farmer who arrive in a slum to become middle class, or to his children to become middle class? I think this is the way it should be seen. Then it's not a question of establishing a minimum standard. We have to accept that some people move in the city and will not be able to afford those minimum standards. What we have to concentrate on is not so much how much land and floor space they will consume, but rather how much water, safe water, we can give them, how much electricity we can give them, how many schools can we provide them for good schools. I don't think that consumption in itself, or floor space or land, is the real issue. I think it's more the services you provide. And here again, we get back a bit to some of the idea that Montec mentioned at the beginning, either cost subsidies or pricing differently, pricing differently the first 50 liters of water consumed, pricing differently the first kilowatt of electricity consumed. Yes, that's certainly, but if you do that, it means that the rest has to be really priced at the market. You cannot subsidize the poor if you also subsidize the rich. Finally, by the way, those ideas seems a little, let's say, some people tell me you are a little idealistic, or anarchistic. Well, I'm not really an anarchist, but those ideas, in fact, have been implemented, I would say, unwillingly and informally in a number of countries. For instance, if I look at Indonesia, in Indonesia, the Kampung Improvement Program, it was a way of allowing people to consume the land and the floor space they wanted, they could afford, and the government only provided the infrastructure. After 30 years of a very consistent policy, because you need consistency in policy when you do something like that, if you visit those kampong in Indonesia, you can still see very poor people in them. But those poor people are completely mixed with people who are very close to the middle class or even middle class. All of them have safe water supply. They have a very modest house. I mean, some of them are shacks, which are very similar to the shacks you have in Indian slums. But the big difference is that they have access to water supply. The garbage is removed every morning. You have a community system which removes the garbage, and the municipality collect the garbage at the entrance of the kampong. You have also other experiments like that, which again were not government policy, they came accidentally. In Vietnam and in China, as the city expanded, they absorbed a lot of villages. And as you know, especially in this part of Asia, the density of villages are very high. So the number of people or the area which were integrated in the city were very high. And under the Chinese and also the Vietnamese system, they divide people into rural people and urban. So the villagers were absorbed, were allowed to consume the amount of land and floor space they wanted. They were completely free from regulations. And they developed houses, and in particular rental rooms, which were affordable to the migrants. The advantage of those compared to slums is that those villages by necessity are relatively small, and they are surrounded by infrastructure, so they were very easy to service. Let me know when I run out of time. If you look now in China and Vietnam, the amount of people who have been absorbed, and if you look at housing standard, you see that most of the absorption of the poorer people, the people who are laborer, who are the most unskilled laborer, are living in those villages. Now, some cities in India, for instance, Ahmedabad has Gamtal, which would be a bit the equivalent of those villages. Except that I'm not completely sure why maybe Vimal could tell us, why the Gamtal do not really develop into a low-cost housing, relatively dense tenement. I don't know. But what can be done, and what is being done now in Indonesia, where this is really the policy, is that if you look at the zoning plan of Jakarta or Surabaya, you see that in the suburbs, in areas which are not yet urbanized, the government has already put a zoning around villages which are larger than the village, and where here, again, the consumption of land and floor space will not be regulated, will be just adjusted by what the people can afford. The advantage of doing that is that you avoid what I would call the Dharavi syndrome, where you have suddenly 600,000 people living in one settlement, all of them poor, without infrastructure. You have only small pockets of people who are relatively close of your primary infrastructure. And here again, I'm coming back to my first comment on the role of government in infrastructure. I think that the interest of the community is really on the primary infrastructure. The secondary infrastructure is also important, but as you go lower and lower, to the access of the individual road, the government should not give a damn about whether the road is 2 meters, 3 meters, or even 1 meter. There is no interest in the community. I will give you an example. If you build individual houses horizontally, you are supposed to have a minimum road, and you are supposed, by the way, to have most cities minimum parking. If you build apartment, you have access to your apartment through a corridor, which is only 1 meter 30, 40 wide, which would be absolutely illegal if it was horizontal. Why? You don't bring your car, there's no regulation which say you should bring your car on the 3rd floor of your apartment. So, you see, this is very important, I think, when we go through those audits of regulation. On the contrary, a road every kilometer, or maybe with the density of Indian cities, every 500 meters, which can carry buses, which can carry water supply, which can be able to carry drainage, this is absolutely essential. And if this road suddenly is 30 meters wide, but suddenly become 10 meters because for some reason it was impossible to acquire, this is a tragedy. But if 50% of the population live in houses which are only accessible through a road of 1 meter, I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters. Finally, my last point is that we like to have models. I think most of the models that we know are obsolete. We should not be always looking in a rearview mirror. I have a lot of admiration for the city of Curitiba, or Copenhagen, or Bogota. They had an interesting transport system. They were extremely innovative. But large metropolitan area, like Delhi, Mumbai, Seoul, Shanghai, has nothing to do. They are different animals. They have nothing to do with Curitiba or Copenhagen. They cannot be models. We are seeing here a new phenomenon, new type of urbanization. We are only trying to understand how does the labor market work in a city like Shanghai or Delhi or Mumbai. How do people move? You know, the justification of those large urbanization is that increasing the size of the labor market increase productivity. And all the data show that it does, but we don't know how it happened. It happened because of transport. My fear is that the new poor in those big metropolitan areas are not people who will be not eating enough, starving, or not having clothes, not being able to afford clothes. I think very soon they will be able to afford housing, like we see in China, you know, now. What they will do if we cannot plan adequately, they will have 3 hours of commute every day. The new proletariat are not people like in the time of Dickens who are dying of black lung disease. They are people who commute 3 hours to be able to make a living. If people commute 3 hours, they have no family life, they have no social life, they have no possibility to improve themselves, they have no way to transmit their culture to their children. So I think it's even worse than getting tuberculosis, you know, like it was the case in the case of Dickens. So I think that we have to acknowledge that, again, looking back and saying, well, you know, New York Metro works very well, why don't we expand it? A metro system works well to serve a downtown area when jobs are concentrated. As soon as jobs disperse, a traditional metro system is not very adequate. We have to invent new system. And one of them will be, I think, to have relatively distant station, rapid station going from one side of a metropolitan area to another with stop station every 10 kilometers, and then to have individual means of transportation which goes from station to door, door to door, not a series of network which are connected together. At the end of the station, you need an individual means of transportation. Whether this is a motorcycle or a rickshaw or something like that, I don't know. But you cannot have a system and, you know, a complete system of public transit which will serve those very large metropolitan areas, which now are usually covering more than 3,000 square kilometers. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. I should just explain a little bit here that our idea in inviting Elaine Bartaud and Paul Smoke and Anuradha Joshi was to go beyond the Indian perspective, have people who have looked at these challenges in other countries as well, so that they can comment and bring to our attention things which may not have really become part of the discourse, because as has been pointed out, there has not been much discourse on urbanization in India. I would also like to take this opportunity to make 2 other points. One is that this book is not comprehensive. It does not cover all the areas that we know are challenges facing India.